It's Wellness Wednesday, and this Wellness Wednesday, we're going to start videos devoted to men's mental health because it's Men's Mental Health Month. And one of my issues with men's mental health, I think that we need to call attention to the ways it's different in broad strokes, but I am always uncomfortable dealing with half the population as a monolith. But I do think it's important to pull men's mental health away from anti-violence, anti-domestic violence, away from this idea that men are just bad or predatory or prone to violence and need to be pulled away from that, not to make them happier, but because it's better for society or women or whatever. There is this message with the way the programs are packaged that men are a problem that needs correcting, as opposed to a program devoted to helping individual men thrive as individuals. So that's why, despite my reservations with the idea, we're going to talk about it. And if you hear me talking with a lisp, there it was. I just got Invisaligns put on my lower teeth to fix this one tooth that decided over years to drift. But as is typical with me, the one tooth was an indicator of a larger problem. It's a little, I don't know, a lot and very off topic for this video. So I'm going to talk to the patrons about it tomorrow. If you want to become a patron, help support this channel, become a monthly patron, patreon.com/LeannaK, not the very least, which I need help paying for these motherfuckers, or buy a one-time Leanna Care session for someone who can use it but can't afford it, coffee.com/LeannaK, and I make a little money myself. The Leanna Care sessions really help inform this content, so it really is a win-win. But yeah, these things, oh man. Anyway, the patrons will get that. But second time in my life with braces, that's what Invisalign basically is. But that is not the point. The point here is how men's mental health is different. And again, this came from, most of my client base are men. And a pretty diverse group otherwise, Some are gay, some are straight, some are bisexual, different races, different backgrounds, different religions. The only thing they tend to have in common are their introverted, sensitive in a good way guys. And what I've found is that the classical model of therapy, because both CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, and DBT, dialectic behavioral therapy, were both designed by women, certain things are very feminized in the way it's presented. And whenever they try to do a more neutral color scheme on the materials, it's just sort of depressing or childlike. And while it's good to connect with your more childlike qualities, your inner child, that is not the focus of this video. I will be saving that for when I do the Claire Obscure video, probably next month, to give people a chance to, if they want to play the game and not be spoiled, give it more time. Because that definitely is a game where it's a completely different experience if you go in spoiled. Maybe not worse, honestly, but, it's designed to be gone in a certain way. But yeah, Eskie and Monoko are the best parts of the game, and they say a lot of things, I think accidentally, that are actually beneficial to mental health. But we're talking about men's mental health today. And we know on the clinical side that the hardest part of men's mental health is getting men into the programs. And that is not an accident, and it is not men's fault. It's amazing how many of, how many people I work with said, their wives insisted they needed to talk to somebody or something like that, and they picked this, which is humbling, and I'm glad they trust me. But, you know, a lot of people I work with are in therapy. They gave it a try. It wasn't helpful. In some cases it was very gaslighty. And there is a disconnect between masculine frameworks and, you know, proper mental health concepts that do kind of sandwich men in kind of a not great place, a rock and a hard place, in a different way that women are sandwiched between a rock and a hard place. For women, it's if you set boundaries, you're a bitch. And the truth is, like, do it anyway. And I guess it's not that different for men, because a lot of places where if you express something's bothering you, if you have a full range of emotions, some people, especially some women, will treat you like you're a bitch. There's a reason I have issues with this word. But there's also this girl power thing going on right now where we keep seeing the most ridiculous example of it that I've seen in media comes from an episode of The Rookie. You know, the Nathan Fillion cop show? And I forget her name. She was on Supergirl as well. She's an actress that's kind of been in things, but she plays a paramedic and she's far too glamorous to be, you know, a typical paramedic. Not that there aren't some pretty paramedics, just nobody spends that much time on their lashes as a paramedic, right? Or very few of them do. And her hair and the rest of her makeup, right? And she's also super tiny. Like, not just short, like super tiny. And paramedics have to lift, right? But I digress. There's this one plot line where her abusive ex is back in the picture and she's scared. So there's a hitman after the ex. It's a cop show. And she texts the hitman her ex-boyfriend's location so that the hitman can do the hit, and it works out, and the ex-boyfriend gets dead, and Nathan Fillion's character, who is a cop, finds out, confronts her, and she snaps the cell phone with the evidence in half and throws it off the roof right in front of him. And he gets angry, and they almost break up because he's a cop, and she just destroyed evidence. And the show turned this into, well, he didn't support her emotionally in her time of need. I'm sorry, letting your wife destroy evidence is not emotional support. I swear that last season of The Rookie was written by AI or something like that, because there was some weird, like, fake girl power moments. But this is the world that men live in. And much like I had to accept that for my own mental health, I had to set boundaries. And that means people are going to call me a bitch and treat me like a bitch and all the dehumanizing things that come with it. But I had to do it anyway. And men get all that stuff when they start making changes from the people around them. It's amazing how much families keep somebody pulled down like crabs in a bucket. But not only do... Well, I've gotten this too, ironically, the "you're scaring me" thing when you start making changes and setting boundaries. The other thing I've heard from quite a few men, and this is one of those things where I see what happens in therapy and where it comes from, but the execution of it is very hurtful, where a man will be talking about something and the woman in his life will go, "It's not, your feelings are not my fault," or something like that. "I am not responsible for your feelings." And it's said a lot of the time in this snap way. And the guy is left going, "I wasn't blaming you. I was just talking about how I feel." Now, I'm not there. You know, it could have been the language of blame, without realizing it. But there's also this thing where a lot of women hear blame in a man's statement, because if it were a woman, somebody saying that would totally be blaming the other woman, but that's not how men talk. And this becomes a problem because, I went through, when I first started having to make changes after the PTSD diagnosis, getting really bad reactions to the changes I was trying to make. And the last thing a person wants to be is a burden. The second last thing a person wants to be is a terror. And I got both. The "you're scaring me" is so toxically overused. And, it may be true. Here's the thing. A lot of women who go, I'm not responsible for your feelings, also go, "you're scaring me," instead of going, "I'm scared right now." And one of the things that gets taught and gets butchered all the time in therapy is I statements, I-centered language, right? So I am scared versus "you're scaring me." But what people end up doing, because they really they don't realize that in a healthy relationship, "I'm scared" should be enough to slow things down. That's not the way they were raised. So "you're doing it to me" becomes the thing they throw to make it stop. And yes, you are taught in therapy that you're not responsible for other people's feelings. Someone can inspire, but it doesn't tend to go the other way. So I say all the time, somebody can inspire a feeling in me. Something they did inspired me to feel angry, but they didn't make me angry. Something about the story behind that made me angry. And that is a real change in attitude, right? And the reason I don't get treated like a proper girl is because I don't take those easy outs that are properly feminine. And that becomes a real problem for men who are struggling, because, like it or not, those women in their lives are upholding that, elements of masculinized expectations, like male, female stuff, that aren't healthy for men, but are normal. And that is a real challenge with therapy being so separate from, overall life stuff. It's tough because, therapists are trained to know that things are going through a particular lens, but sometimes things slip through, and you want to build trust with someone. So a lot of therapists sort of get over eager or agree to things, and every therapist has their own bias and so on and so forth. So it's a tough one. And, ultimately therapy can't replace supportive people in your life. But there is another element of men's mental health structurally that I find men take a lot more time to get into things than women do. There's got to be sort of small talk for sometimes as much as 45 minutes. And I find the ideal session length for a lot of men is an hour and a half. Whereas your standard therapy session, where you get through, sitting down and getting into it, and then, it's 45 minutes. And it's on a timer, right? So a lot of guys feel like they weren't listened to in therapy, or the therapist didn't understand them, or their therapist shut them down too. And feeling shut down is a very common thing with men. And that's a vicious cycle. And that's where we get into, the DBT model having different challenges for, like, male socialization and female socialization. As I said, female and male socialization, not men and women, because this is a big not all men. I find that men their distress tolerance is way overdeveloped. Like, guys are experts at shouldering shitty stuff. And that's how men are trained by society, right? Women are allowed to break down and cry and all this stuff, and men are supposed to be stone-faced. But it's at the detriment of the two other skills in the DBT triangle, which is mindfulness and emotional regulation. And so because only one pillar is focused on in male socialization, the resilience is just not there. That's where you get, most guys that end up in anger management actually have either trouble with, now, emotional regulation isn't just about emotional regulation. It's not a great name. It's about naming and fully feeling your feelings without an immediate urge to act on them. And being able to process emotions, at the same rate that they're coming in. That's what emotional regulation is. And that sort of, romanticizing the guy who is just sitting there drinking or smashing stuff, the Wolverine thing. And I love that character, don't get me wrong, but not an ideal. But it is a romanticized, flawed anti-hero type character, right? And, men exploding in anger is seen as normal instead of a sign that something's really wrong. And that's a social problem that I don't think therapy can really address on its own. Because it's anger, you get the "you're scaring me" response instead of like, look, I want to know what's bothering you, but I can't talk to you and you're breaking shit, right? And so there's a sense of nobody cares. Because a guy who's been raised to think that because dad did it and uncles did it and the boss did it and everything like that, that those kind of explosions are expressing emotion. What emotion? They can't name it. And that's another thing I find big with men's mental health, is that emotional vocabulary. Men feel feelings. And men are just as good as women at recognizing feelings in other people. But a lot of men are terrified of other people's negative feelings, especially women's like harder feelings. I'm talking like sadness, anger, fear, because of the attitude that, well, she's upset, I need to do something about that. And of course, again, that's the need to do something part of the emotional regulation. You don't find out what's wrong first. And, if she's like, I shouldn't have to tell you, well, that's not healthy, even though it's very normal. But that ability to name your own feelings, I find, is not there. If I ask somebody, how did that make you feel? There's usually silence or like bad, right? It's like, okay, what kind of bad? And they can't name it until I start going, well, in your position, I would feel scared and embarrassed, or I would feel sad and kind of angry. And then they'll say, yeah, or they'll say, no, I wasn't that. I was this other thing. But doing it independently, that's something that a lot of women do too, but it's different emotions. Though more and more men won't admit they're angry, I find, because angry is bad, especially on the left. I find like, blue collar dudes, even if they're more on the liberal side, tend to be able to say, I'm pissed off. But like these left-wing dudes who are male feminists, they will be seething and passive aggressive and not able to admit they're angry. They're frustrated. Well, frustrated is, okay, you should be able to control frustration. Anger, okay, you understand that emotion really burns. But when you're yelling at people and name calling and taking shitty shots and pulling crap, and you can't even admit that you're angry, that's not fair to everyone around you. And I find people in that state, what you're supposed to do is you're supposed to try to validate their feelings, not their behavior, right? So what the problem is that they can't name their feelings. So when you go, look, I understand that you're angry. I'm not angry. Don't you dare accuse me of being angry. I'll tell you if I'm angry. Okay, then what are you? Well, I'm pissed off at you. You did this and you did that. And they don't realize it's the same thing. They're angry. But oh no, they're not angry. You did this to me. And that's exactly the kind of behavior that, I talked about earlier with women. It is amazing dealing with angry men, how much it goes to, you did this, and you did this, and you did this. And a lot of it it's about motivations, and it's more about their fear and them being angry that they're afraid. And that's what we call primary and secondary emotions, or emotions and meta emotions. There's how you feel and how you feel about your feelings. And so these guys are so twisted that they can't feel the primary feeling, because there are certain feelings that are just off limits. It used to be men were allowed to be angry and nothing else, whereas women, it was the one thing you're not allowed to be is angry. Now it's not even anger for men, because that's scary. So what's left? Nobody's allowed to feel a full range of emotions. And here's the thing. Everyone feels all the feelings. Like, unless you've got some people have very muted emotional responses. They still feel feelings. It's just not as intense as other people. And it can be a symptom of depression. But quite frankly, being in that suppressed state for a lot of guys is safer than the full range of emotions, because those early days when you're learning how to feel scared and angry and, oh God, I had to leave, my parents' house to be allowed to be angry. And that was a huge part of my problem, is people feel angry, but you're not allowed, there are just certain people you're not allowed to be angry at me. They never come out and say it, but they always punish you for being angry around them. And those are people that, may have some self-blame issues going on. I don't know. But because the emotional regulation, and these are skills, this isn't mental illness. These are skills. With a lot of clients, I practice, how are you feeling? And I always joke about the inside out thing. Like, I feel inside out character, please. There's more complicated emotions than that, but that's a good start, right? And just getting that emotional vocabulary, being able to name the combination of physical and emotional sensations that a guy has never been allowed to really fully experience before, because it was considered, a burden, or you're scaring me. And yeah, if somebody's exploding, that's scary. You can both say, look, I'm not going to deal with you when you're exploding because you call me names and you blame me for shit, and I'm not dealing with that. By the way, you broke something. Don't break my stuff. That's unacceptable. I do care about how you're feeling. I do. We can't do that. And if so, well, that's just the way I express myself. There are other ways. There are. That's family patterns that have been going on for generations. And, dad exploded, granddad exploded. Was granddad in the military during World War II? That might have something to do with it. Was he in Korea? Was he in Vietnam? You know, that's what we talk about when we talk about intergenerational trauma, and we don't talk about that enough with men. We talk about it with people whose mothers were traumatized that way, but we don't talk about it as much with men. That just because something wasn't considered good doesn't mean it wasn't considered normal, right? And so what you see, what you experience, what is justified or explained away by other adults when you're a kid, you can't possibly be led to believe, even if it's frightening for you, you think, and I mean, I'm talking about myself here. Oh, if, daddy's just upset. He was really upset with what you did. He's not a bad person. He's a good person who does bad things sometimes. That teaches a kid to internalize that somebody gets upset, it's my fault. And there's fucking someone over. But, what you deal with there is that you inconvenience someone, or you fuck them over, or you put them in a bad spot. Not, well, every time somebody explodes on me or calls me a name, it's my fault. Right? That's why when you're apologizing for something, it's very important that you apologize for what you did, not the other person's feelings. Because that goes both ways. Other people's feelings are not your fault. What you did, you're responsible for, right? Because other people's reactions to those same events can be very, very different, right? But what we have is, women on the DBT triangle tend to that sort of emotional regulation in people with trauma is like not there, right? It tends to not be, but it's different, right? A lot of crying, a lot of screaming. That's how it expresses in women stereotypically. With men, it's the pack down, right? There might be unreasonable fears in women, whereas men don't learn how to name the feeling of fear, because the idea that being brave means you're not allowed to have it. And I've been calling clients brave a lot lately because of the stuff they've said they're going through. And I've said, you've been very brave to just get up every day with that going on. And it's usually kind of silence at first, because it's like they didn't see it that way. But when somebody says it, yeah. If somebody's carrying this struggle, right? If somebody is just carrying these bad feelings and sees no end in sight, that's brave. That brave person deserves for life to be easier than it is, as opposed to women who usually need help being less afraid of everything, because society makes it more acceptable for women to just go, I'm afraid, and everything stops. Not me. I never had that. I don't girl right. But I've seen it I've seen women do it to me. They go, I'm afraid of her. And people just believe them. And it's like, what the fuck am I gonna do? And usually what it comes down to is I'm gonna make a compelling argument. And they'll have to admit that they either lied or weren't so innocent, right? And a lot of guys are like, yeah. And yeah, not all women are like that. I assure you, right? And that's why the sort of idealized women in media being that being kind of normal is, I miss characters like Jessica Rabbit. I really do. We need more I'm not bad, I'm just drawn that way. But, emotional regulation manifests differently in men and in women. The distress tolerance, a lot of women, like, it's low. Whereas men, it's overdeveloped. And that's a great skill to have in a clutch, but it shouldn't be every day. That's cacking your resilience just because, like any engine that's just revved constantly. You gotta monitor your PC temperature for a reason, right? It runs too hot all the time. Your PC's gonna break. Your distress tolerance is the same way. And it's that mindfulness that really ties everything together. And mindfulness is such a woo-woo word. I hate it. Mindfulness is paying attention to the present moment, reserving judgment, focusing on your thoughts, feelings, and body sensations. I describe it as, yeah, I'm angry. I don't have to do anything about it right away. And that really is that it's taking the controls back from the amygdala hijack that makes you want to go Hulk, right? The amygdala being the part of the brain that's sort of the do something part. And if you've been raised your whole life by men who just shut down or lash out when the distress tolerance is, the PC is overheated, mindfulness is going to seem like a completely foreign concept, right? The idea that you can be angry or scared or sad and just be that. What happens with most people, especially with anger, is I'm angry. I'm not supposed to be angry. Angry is what makes men violent. Violence is, all men are predators. That's what society says. Am I a predator? I don't want to be a predator. What if I'm a predator? Right? Because then it goes into, no, I'm not a predator. And it's not fair that I should feel this way. It's not fair that all men should be labeled predators. I'm allowed to get angry without somebody saying I'm frightened. Why can't I just have this? And now you've got an intense sense of unfairness and anger and like an extra level of anger and disappointment just about being angry. And what mindfulness teaches you is how to just go, I'm angry. There are certain times where you have a right to be angry. It's just learning new ways to express it. And people don't like assertiveness. Trust me. I deal with this all the time, but it's better for you. It really is, because then you'll get people, first of all, who are like-minded, and everybody's allowed to have a full range of emotions without anybody being abusive about it. But one thing I had to learn is alone and lonely aren't the same thing. If you're lonely around your friends, if you're lonely around your partner, if you feel like something's missing, it's worth talking to someone about what that is and really sort of figuring if there's something that you can add to your life to help that. And often it's just space to be you. Dedicated times during the week where you get to watch the movie you want to watch, you get to that. I think that's why sports is so ritualized in the US, is it's just sort of protected time. Just being able to pick something and not have to put everyone else first is something very important for individuals, men and women alike. And exercise, super important. If you don't like it, stretching. I don't even go with walking. Most people, well, just try walking. I remember when I was full-blown PTSD, like the point that my body hurt every goddamn day, walking was beyond me. It was too painful. My hips, my back, my shoulders, it was all the pain points, right? Because your body's in shock. And what I found was stretching, especially big all over body stretches, like to the side there, big this way, all that stuff. It instantly, I find, makes you feel more energized. Stretching here is an instant boost in everything. Don't stretch until it's unbearably painful. But if you've got a lot of repetitive injuries, it will feel kind of burn. But stretching is a good place to start, and then you can add the walking. But that exercise, if you're not a crier, if you don't like get things out that way, exercise is a really good way to flush those stress hormones from your body. And then it's about adding in the better hormones, like the joy hormones, the closeness hormones, right? And that's a process, and it's different for everybody. There are very good therapists out there. And if you think you need medication, or if you think like a traditional DBT model would be useful based on that, there are some group programs as well, a lot of the places that are low cost or free. There's therapy. You only usually get 6 to 8 weeks covered by the government, if that, but at least it's a start, you know? Part of the reason I started doing what I do is to offer lower cost alternatives. And I really, really believe in the model because, you know, this isn't a degree that I learned this. This was me talking to a lot of people, working with people, you know, the combination of the journalism and then my own personal experiences, what worked for me, what didn't work for me. You know, my attitude is we start with, okay, here's the boilerplate. Here's what we're supposed to try first. Does this work? No. Okay, we're going to find something else. And just that sense that you matter, that overcoming that disposability message, that overcoming you're supposed to be a rock, right? That's why I like the Rocky movies. Rocky has feelings, right? There's a lot of feelings in Rocky movies. That dude goes through some shit. So, you know, he talks about it's not how hard you hit, it's how hard you get hit and keep getting back up. He said that's how you win. But how do you get back up? That's, you know, it's a difference between get up, you lousy bum, and get up, you lousy bum because Mickey loves you. It's that because Mickey loves you part. And a lot of guys out there don't feel loved. They don't feel like anybody cares. You hear nobody cares a lot. And I guarantee you somebody out there does care about you. But if you constantly have a wall up protecting the world from yourself, you can't let that love in. You can't feel it because you're like, well, if they really knew me, they wouldn't care. And that's a scary thing to confront. You know, there's a lot of mourning, a lot of grieving for lost time that has to go on, but it's doable. You know, it can be done. So I'll be doing more videos throughout the month. Hopefully it's helpful. And if you want to sign up for a session, great. Or check out, you know, free programs or low cost programs in your area. I know a lot of people do not have the $200 a session to spend on a therapist. So help support this channel. Become a monthly patron, patreon.com/Leanna K, or buy a one-time Leanna Care session for someone who can use it but can't afford it so we can work on stuff like this. Coffee.com/Leanna K. Thanks for watching and be well.